Hello and welcome to Bass Cafe with Holly and Dean. I'm Holly West,
And I'm Dean.
and we are two bassists on planet Earth trying to make people learn more about bass.
Yeah, because they need to. Bass
Because
players don't get any respect.
that's right. This is our third episode of Bass Cafe with Holly and Dean.
Woohoo!
The first two, I think, turned out pretty good. We just released our second one, and um, so far, so good. I can't think of anybody there's one person that disliked our first video,
I
but I think
saw, dude, there's always one. There's always one. I was like, really? Really? So, all right, troll it. Troll it. That's fine. That's fine.
yeah, they don't have enough going on in their life. Maybe they should play bass.
I watch a few different YouTube channels, and I especially love this one guy, Simon Whistler. He always says, "Smash the dislike button."
Yeah,
So,
smash that
yeah, because
button,
whatever.
man. Smash,
Interact with it. I don't care. Hate it.
hate that button. But we are having so much fun,
Yeah.
and we're able to bring in a lot of our really close and awesome friends that we've either toured with or we've just been friends with for a long time to do a lot of bass talk. And we're very, very excited that today we're going to be talking about the bassist's primary role, which is so
Know
important.
your role.
Know your role.
Yes.
And as a bassist, sometimes it's kind of confusing. Where does it actually fit in? What are we doing here? And then later on, we'll have an interview. I did an interview with my friend Pete Merluzzi. You don't know him by name, but I guarantee you he's been at some of the best concerts that you've been at. He has toured with some of the biggest names in the business. He started out with Our Lady Peace, and right now he's on tour. Well, he works with Judas Priest. So you've seen him. You might know his voice if you ever went to the Slash shows. He was he did the opening voice for Slash shows. So, yep, he's been on tour with Slash, and so let's see, AC/DC, Guns N' Roses, all those people. So I wanted to talk to him about, since he's been a bass player since he was a kid, I wanted to talk to him about how he perceives bass players and being with some of the best ones touring all over the world, how what he thinks, who he thinks is up to par.
Right, out of all those legends.
Of all those legends, who's the best one?
So like I always look at like we're talking about the role of a bass player, right? Like for me, I say it all the time. Like it's what makes the hips shake, you know? And because of that, we have to find our dead groove, if you will.
Yes.
Yeah, we have to find our groove. And like sometimes that's it's a really important topic that not everybody like attaches. When you open up a book on how to play either guitar or bass, right? They don't always talk about what it's like to gel with your bandmates because you're not always just playing on the one. You're not always just hitting a root note. You're not sometimes you're floating a little bit. Sometimes you're playing a triplet beat while everyone else is doing 4/4 or when's that scale run supposed to come in? Do you put it on top of the drum fill or do you put it opposite the drum fill, on the opposing bar so that way it stands out more and adds dynamic? These are really important questions.
Yeah, and I know playing in Zepparella, playing John Paul Jones's parts live, that there's a lot of manipulation in that.
There's a lot of his notes that are like I learned a few Zeppelin songs, nowhere near like you, right? But on bass for School of Rock in Los Angeles, we did a Zeppelin show and the staff band, we learned some songs and performed them for the kids. And I learned those bass parts and I was trying to be overly critical of like, I'm the teacher, so I better play it perfect,
Yeah.
and I really wanted to get all those little things. And there's some notes that he puts in there where he like rushes them like right before the bar ends. He like rushes these notes in there that are but aren't on time, like and it's so perfect. It adds this element
Yeah.
to the music, when you know where to play with your band.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you play with a really, really good drummer and you play with somebody that you really connect with, that's another thing that just helps. I've been very fortunate to play with some really awesome drummers, and it makes a big difference when you're trying to really push those boundaries of the music that you're playing.
Especially when I get a gig playing bass, if I don't have a good drummer, then it's a full-time job.
It is a full-time job
It's a
because
full-time job because
you're
like,
marrying everything, you're putting everything together. So,
and I'm so hands-on. I'm like, even though a lot of my gigs are like stage techs, too, right? I get stage tech gigs or playing gigs. When I'm playing, if something happens, I'm like half a tech. Like if the kick drum mic like
Mhm.
gets knocked out by like the singer or someone running by, I'll be playing bass, walk up and like move it with my foot and like hold it in place. Or if like the drummer's kick drum starts like beefing forward as they hit it, I walk over and I put my foot in front of it and like move it back and like right. So if I get a drummer who can't hold the beat, but I'm a bass player who's willing to be your cinder block, like literally, like it's just a hard job. Like it's bad enough when you have to face away from the crowd and go and fix the on stage catastrophe, but then to go and like, come on, dude, like get on the one, like like anything like that, trying to coach a drummer back, and to take away from the show for that, that's just like hard, man.
it's really hard because the bass and the drum, I mean, it's the backbone and the heartbeat of the music. And so if they're not syncing together, it makes your job really hard.
Yeah, and I usually tend to be a part of bands that are where everyone is like a mini composer of the show too, right? Like the best bands are the ones when you don't have to talk and
Mhm.
you can just communicate, right? And you have to like what is it called? Like web and flow with each other.
Yeah. Yeah, you have like silent communication. I have that a lot with I mean with everybody that I'm on stage with. Because you do have visual cues for certain songs or pretty much every song. You always have visual cues as well as audible cues. But when you want to go up to somebody and rock out with them, I mean, you go up there and you rock out. You don't be like, "Can I go rock out with you?" It's just
Right.
you all work together to put on the show. And
But and that's
so
the other thing. Like I always want to go over to my drummer to rock out with him, not go over there and like
tell them what to
get
do.
him to find the groove, or like, remember when the change, like
Yeah,
sometimes that stuff happens, but that's like when you're the team, right?
yeah.
When you're building together, that's different. But
Yeah, but I think both of you have been pretty, or both of us have been pretty fortunate not to have to work.
not anymore, man. But back in the day, all
Yeah,
the time,
yeah.
yeah.
I
Because
think it'd be better to practice with a metronome than a bad drummer.
right, and to be fair, I mean, who knows? I probably wasn't even as great of a a bassist either at those points, But it's all about coming up, and working.
Yeah.
But yeah, so one of the things that I've played in a few punk bands on bass. I played with the Independents in 2015. I did a 6 week tour with them. That was really cool because I had never even really known that band
Mhm.
too much. Like I knew him from playing shows with them because I did punk rock tours with Darrow Chemical Company and stuff. Um, but when I got that gig, I learned so much about how to approach bass differently because all right, so I'm like mainly I was raised on like industrial music and metal music, right? Everything 90s. So it was like from Metallica to Alice in Chains and Nine Inch Nails and Marilyn Manson and even maybe a Garth Brooks song here and there because it was the 90s, but like maybe one or two New Kids on the Blocks, you know. That's my era. I
Guilty.
I definitely used to sing Hanging Tough walking down the hallways in
Yeah,
first
okay. I
grade.
don't even remember those songs, but there you go. Thank
Oh,
you.
I do. Oh, I do.
Oh, man.
But when I got the gig, it was a last minute gig, and we're gonna touch in on this later. But when I got the gig, it was a last minute gig. I was supposed to go on tour playing lead guitar for the opening band, and wound up playing bass for the headlining band on the tour, right? But
Mhm.
I got 3 days for those songs, and so the guitar player told me, he's like, listen, man, just play the root notes. Don't worry, don't go crazy. Just get it. And I did. I learned the root notes to get myself through the song. But I focused so hard because I really, really, really wanted to know. There were so many bass runs within this ska music, right? It's horror ska. Joey Ramone used to manage the band,
Mhm.
and I just wanted to, I wanted to learn that. And I wanted to see where that fit. And it was I worked on it like the first few weeks of the first week and a half of the tour, like trying to just get everything in place, and it really broadened my perspective. I was a guitar player who had to then play bass for bands, so I had to like not play bass like a guitar player.
Mhm.
That's a very big thing for me.
Yeah.
Like I still am not 100% bass player when I play. I still approach some of it like a guitar player, because duh. But I try and learn as many things as I can on where to sit, because it is such a different plane of playing. It's not just right there, it's here.
Yeah, yeah. There's kind of a matronly touch, not matronly, how do you say it? Like a motherly touch. Like it's kind of a feminine, no, I'd say feminine touch. Like it's very just just kind of have to know, it's like a sixth sense. I don't know
Yeah,
how you
and that the same goes for even like crazy tapping stuff. Like you only can tap in those crazy intervals, right? When you see in one of our next episodes, I'm going to talk about. I did an interview with my friend Killian Duarte from Scale of Summit, and he plays eight finger tapping, and you still have to know when you can put that stuff in there, where it can go. You're not always tapping the root notes that the guitar is doing. If you have like a guitar player tapping and a bass player tapping, sometimes you guys are playing harmonies. Sometimes you guys are playing, a counterpoint.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're doing counter rhythms,
Hmm.
like, and then that all the bass, it helps marry the drums to the guitar, especially in complex music, especially in prog music.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Technique is really, really important, but your rhythm and your harmony are really essential as well.
When you first started playing, what was the hardest like aspect of finding the groove for you, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I was kind of thrown in, so I really just had to learn how to play the songs, and play. I guess it was the rhythm. I guess it was the playing the right notes at the right time. I was kind of blind as far as, where I was supposed to be. I just knew that I had frets I had to be on, and this song was in this fret, and then you go to this fret. It was very hard to break out of that box because I had to spend all of my time worrying about those songs. And
Right.
then when I got from there, I started learning more about, what the names of the notes were, and then how they work together, and what a scale is, and how you take that scale and you can put it all over the neck, And I think I guess the hardest part wasn't technique then. It was the learning the things I needed to learn so that my skill levels were I could use my techniques well.
Right. Like, yeah, in the beginning for me, I didn't understand. Like, I'm self-taught, so for the most part, and like research, and back in the day it was like books, from Barnes and Noble, and or going to a concert and then watching the bass player, or the guitar player or the singer and the drummer, actually watching the whole entire band, learning everyone and how everyone does everything, because in order to be a better bass player, right, sometimes you have to go to the show and watch a drummer, make sure that you understand those maneuvers too, you know
Yeah, actually, I'm still listening to Victor Wooten's book on audiobook, The Music Lesson, and you know the guy that visits him, his music teacher. he basically kind of says, if you're a bassist, you're a bassist. Okay, you're a bass player. But if you want to be a musician, you have to know music. And so it's so imperative to listen to everything that's going around you. It's imperative to learn more than one instrument and to branch out of whatever, you don't want to just be a bass player, because if you're just a bass player, then you're just a bass player, but you're not going to understand all of music that way. You need to become a musician. So it's really
I
important.
definitely get classified as a musician. Like I played drums first, right? And then I play guitar, and then a year later I got a bass, and then um, I've sang on my own stuff. I play piano, not like, I'm not a master at anything overly too much. I mean, more guitar and bass than the others, but my knowledge of how notes work from my reference of the stringed instruments allows me to understand, where the drums are, or where the keyboards are, and understand at least the concepts of, if I do want to throw piano on a song, I don't have to be Beethoven. I
Yeah.
can just know what the bass and the guitar are doing and the vocals are doing, and play within that, just add a layer. You could even, just like a lot of bands, they put like synth tracks underneath, sine waves underneath, following the rhythms and chugs and stuff. And you have to just know what's going on if you want to get that pro production that we always talk
Yeah.
about,
Yeah, absolutely.
especially with bass nowadays, because we talked in our last episode on how, the sound has changed from analog to digital.
Hmm.
And everybody puts sine wave on with the bass, so like you have to know what's going on there.
Hmm.
Like almost every metal album, like every Whitechapel album, there's not, when you're hearing the bass, you're not just hearing their bass, you're hearing a keyboard part or a programmed out synth part that's laying underneath there, giving it
Yeah.
that sound.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because if you are going to a show and you have a record, you kind of, I don't know, as far as I'm concerned, I like for my record to sound like the show. If I want to go to a show, I don't want to hear a different band play. I want to hear the band that I hear on the record. And so if you're putting so many of those tracks and so many layers, it's not going to sound like that live. And but sometimes
Well, nowadays it's just bring the laptop,
that's right. Yeah, just
run the
bring.
iPad.
Mhm. Right. But with a lot of shows, you don't get that. Especially if you're starting out, you're doing a couple, your first couple records, and you want to put so much production in there, and you want to just make it sound so big, but you don't sound like that live, and you can't pull it off live, then just don't do it.
Yeah, 700 vocal tracks.
Yeah. Yeah, if you can't
Bass is probably the one item in a band that doesn't get multi-track to hell on an album.
you
Like
just get punched in at places we mess
you
up.
just get punched in, and then they, like, if anything, they throw a synth on, but like it's never like a guitar. It's recording bass for an album too, right?
Mhm.
I've never had this scenario where there was like 40 bass tracks, but there's so many albums where like the drummer has 7 million piece kit, so there's 4,000 mics on the thing, and top and bottom plus triggers, like, and then it's like 700 vocal tracks, all these harmonies, these major thirds, major sixths, the seventh, bringing up the ninth only the second time around, and then, oh, don't even get me started on when the guitar solos start. The guitar solos, how many
There's two guitars.
and two guitar solos, five guitar solos, one in the intro, one in the bridge, one in the outro, you know, and then the dual guitar keyboard harmonies going on, and then it's just like,
Bass.
and then it's just the bass player. All right, see you later, guys. That's all it really is, man.
It's so important, right?
It's so important. Yeah, but
That's
it's
insane.
that
Because that's
totally.
all we need, okay?
Hey, keep it simple, stupid. Like, yes, there are bands that have like multiple, bass tracks approaches and things like that, but like more often than not. I've never seen an album. I have never seen an album that has like 40 bass tracks. I've definitely seen albums that have 40 guitar tracks.
Maybe like maybe like Les Claypool, maybe some of his albums. Or
Well, the other thing too that we always talk about, so and we also addressed it in the last episode, is that it's such a low frequency,
yeah.
right? A lot of our parts, not all of them, right? When we get up the neck and we creep up the neck for solos or anything like that, we're not we get away with more, but most of what we're playing, it's contrary to my personal belief, bass really isn't always there to be heard. It's really there more to be felt.
Yeah.
And we're sitting in those lower frequency ranges.
Hmm.
There's no room in a
Hmm.
mix that we only hear so much low end with our ears anyway. And like a lot of the times at shows, we're not even so much hearing that as we are feeling the subwoofers, break our rib cage.
Yeah, exactly. The bass is the feeling of the music, and um, the way that we manipulate that is what makes us good bassists. And so I think, when you're talking to people who have been around really, really great bassists, and you're like, well, who's the best one? It's like you really can't put your finger on it because it just depends on what they're doing with that bass at that specific time.
Right. And even we listed off some of our favorite bass players.
Great bassists, yeah.
And if you want to see them, you go to episode 2 of Bass Cafe with Holly and Dean, and then
Yeah.
you could hear about us talk about our favorite bass players. But when we listed that list off, um, everybody was so different in their approach.
Hmm.
Every single person we listed was so different in their approach. But again, like maybe on some albums, a couple of them had 4 or 5 tracks, never 40. you know,
Yeah.
we're go. And because, everyone else is doing so much stuff, that's another reason why we have to be the glue. If there's 40 guitar tracks and then 40 drum tracks and all those vocal parts, we have to be that center line as bass players of that one thing, that where we sit, the range of our instrument
Mhm.
sonically, just the range that's on a bass player, it's in between everything.
Yeah.
And we can get up to higher notes on the neck where a vocalist might be, or at least an octave down, and somewhere pretty close. Um and it's all about how we play off the kick drum, how we play off the snare drum.
Hmm.
There's very many. I love it when a band drops out
Hmm.
and then just the bass plays to bring a band back in.
Hmm.
And if the crowd starts clapping in a 4/4, right? We talked about Carol K before.
Yeah.
The band starts clapping in 4. The crowd starts clapping in 4/4. If you can be a bass player, make it feel like the clapping is moving and
Yeah.
swaying back and forth. That's where you're supposed to be as a bass player, right? And then when the drums and bass, just the two of them, if you guys are locked in, you're gonna blow the roof off the place.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
It's really magical what you can do with just bass and drums.
yeah,
Um,
and it's all about following that kick drum, knowing where that hi-hat is, like knowing where the drummer's fills are gonna go.
yeah.
That's really important.
Yeah. Do you use monitor? Do you use in-ears or monitors? Or
I've
both?
never used in-ears before in my life.
Okay, I haven't either.
Um,
What do
I
you
was
What do
I
you
was
use?
gonna get them for Nita, but we didn't really use them. Like if there was ever like a bigger thing, like that's gonna be my next expense.
Right.
Because I run a fractal, right? And so I don't bring an amp on those shows, but I always want to have a cab behind me, but in those moments, yeah, it's usually just a floor monitor, or like best case scenario, um, floor monitors in front, one maybe two, and
Yeah.
then side fills.
Yeah.
The side fills really help because I can get the high end, like my pick scrape,
Mhm.
here, like in my face, so it's only hitting me,
Yeah.
and then I can get the low end coming from a side fill. And this is with a fractal, right? So no cabinet on stage, nothing. So
Yeah, you
getting
need that right
getting
there.
the side fill on those shows, it kind of just throws the bass across the stage, like.
Yeah.
And there's even been times with no amp on stage, I have to turn down.
Yeah.
Like
They have bass in the
it's like
floor.
the curse of a bass player. It's like I don't even have a cabinet with me, and you're making me turn down.
Yeah, and I hate that.
I
What do
know.
you put in your ears? Do you put what do you put in your ears? Nothing? Okay. So I don't
Nothing.
put okay, so you should probably put at least something in your ears.
Nope.
No, no,
Um,
no,
I
look, you don't have to put earplugs in, put tissue.
I
I
can't. I
learned
can't.
from it.
I have to. I've learned what hurts my ears.
Uh-huh.
So it's different when I have a band with a lot of amps on stage. I'll tell you. But when I'm in a band that's all digital rigs,
Yeah. You didn't.
it's not really as bad as you think. You just
Yeah.
just don't get really close to the china.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
exactly.
honestly the only thing. If I do wear an earplug,
Uh-huh.
it's because I'm playing on the side of the stage, typically where the china is, and that's the
Yeah,
only time. And if I do, I put an earplug in the ear that faces the drums, if anywhere.
yeah,
But the ear that's facing everything else, I can't do it.
yeah.
I've tried. I
So I
cannot.
have two with
Like,
all the earplugs and stuff, and what I do is I just take a beverage nap, and I just there's a certain way that fits perfectly in my ear, and I'll tell you, it cuts out the highs, the really really highs, the ones that really damage your ears, and it makes the lows not so loud, so everything's not as loud. It has saved my ears for sure, because I used to not do anything as well, but then I realized that it's probably gonna mess up my ears. And my ears are sensitive too. They go back quickly, like they recover really quickly.
well, back in the day, I put a kind of really hard rule down about like shrill in tone, not so much for other band members, right? Because everybody is their own, person. But if someone needs help, I will gladly always help them, But with my guitar tone or with my bass tone, um, I make sure to, like, I've always gotten compliments on my tones no matter what instrument I'm on. And the only real thing that I started looking at when it came to me like finding my sound
Mhm.
is I was trying to turn up my amp loud enough so that way it sounded like it was supposed to sound, like in the mix, like volume. If it's supposed to be a band where the bass of the guitar is really high, well, I would have it really loud. But when I had it really loud, I always EQ'd out those frequencies that hurt me,
Yeah.
right? And so I might not have like the most metalist sounding guitar tone, but I can crank it and it will sound great and it won't hurt me. And so, like, I think I spoke about it on the first or second episode. And I'll tell the world, my amp settings, people think I'm nuts, but um, my low is up like 75% on my guitar amps, and my trebles and my mids are somewhere around 10 o'clock on the dial. Like, I
Yeah.
just shut them all out. I'd rather have a nice warm tone than anything that's going to make my ears ring. I just,
Yeah.
hashtag kill the metal zone.
Kill the metal sound.
Yeah.
Great. Well, good. That's
Yeah,
about a bit about earplugs.
yeah, but no, listen, so many people I know swear by them, and like it would totally be different for me if I had in-ears
Mhm.
too, but I get nervous about that because I hear lots of people tell me that they have issues
Yeah, yeah.
because they turn it up too loud in their ear, right?
You have to know how to work the in-ears too. Absolutely.
And I've
Absolutely.
always been nervous about having in-ears and then getting that feedback.
Yeah.
I'll punch someone.
Oh, I was at the grocery store the other day and this cart that was like around me had this like high pitch to it and I was about to go crawl up the wall. Like I was in pain. It was just awful.
Yeah, there's two things that turn me from from nice guy to mean Dean, and
Mean Dean.
yeah, and one of them is like high feedback shrills for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, they're awful.
The other one is cold showers. If
Yeah.
I'm expecting a hot shower and I get like a brick cold shower, I'd much rather just like punch my hand through the tiles than finish taking that shower.
That's awful. I'm
Yep.
with you. I'm
Uh,
with you.
yep.
Ugh. So, when I caught up with Pete for this little bass talk, it's kind of funny because we've been friends for almost 10 years, and we both have been, bassists and knew that we've been bassists, when we met and everything, and we kind of connected on that and everything, but we didn't have as big of a conversation about bass as we did this time, and it was really cool to get his perspective on things, because I think when we think of, when we're doing interviews, we always go for like the star, like I would love to interview Duff McKagan, but guess what, interviewing the person who spent all the time with them and on, a different part of it, and he's also a bassist. It's kind of a cool way to go, cool things to ask as well. So
I always find too that when we ask questions to the people who work with those people,
yeah.
they tend to know a little bit more about what's going on. Like how many stars I've met, and you like growing up, and you're like, man, what strings do you use? And they're like, I don't know.
I don't know. My
And
tech
like,
for
what are
me.
your amp settings? I don't know.
I don't know. My
No, I
text
don't know. Dude
for me.
dials it in. Like I just grabbed a guitar. I'm like,
I just tell him what I want and he does it.
yep, yep, yeah. It's just like I don't know. I tell them good, more or less.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, no, and it's really good to get that perspective.
Yeah. So he's worked with, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine working with the people that he's worked with. Um, you like Hart, for instance, he told me that, Anne just gets up there. She doesn't really rehearse. She just gets up there and does her thing. That's just amazing to me.
Right.
Toured with Kid Rock. We got to go see. I took my whole family to see them when he was in I think in Oklahoma or Texas, and we went to the show, and that was really cool. I mean, he puts on a great show, and I got to hang out with his band afterwards, and they're all just super super cool people, and um, so yeah, it's really awesome to have friends that are so embedded in the industry. You just don't even know half the shit that they've done. That's just all really, really cool stuff.
Well, I mean,
So
this tends to be one of those industries where if you're not a hustler, you're not getting the job, right? And it tends to be those people who work the hardest
mm,
who get the gig, right?
yeah. Yeah, and a lot of that is what we talked about. It's the people who worked really hard and the people who can hang and who you can hang with. If you're not a good hang, you're probably not going to be on the tour. We talk about Rudy Sarzo and how he is really cool to hang with and he gets a lot of jobs. So that's another thing I think we're going to talk about in another episode is just, saying yes to the job and getting the gig. And Rudy is kind of the epitome of that. Everybody knows who he is. He's been on tons of stuff and he's toured with tons of people, but he's the guy
Man
that
after my own
the
heart.
guy. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So we get to talk about, being on tour with Slash and the Conspirators and with Guns N' Roses and
So
all types
cool.
of people. So yeah, he's got some great stories. And as a bassist himself, and then he has his own band. They're called Doomslide. I've been editing a bunch of videos for them, their music videos, and they are like a metal take on pop songs and popular songs, and it's really cool actually. I really
Sweet.
like it.
I like
And
that.
it's super heavy, super bass driven and heavy. And he sings on it as well, and he's got an amazing falsetto. I mean, I he's got a really good radio voice, but he can hit, you know.
I want to take a snippet back to where one of the things you just said, and I love it, that it's so heavy and it's so bass driven. I
hmm
just would like to take that. in my heart and take it in for a second and just know that when most people say heavy, what you really mean is more bass.
Yes,
it's what it's
absolutely.
really what you that's really what you mean. What you mean like like play a 9-string guitar? Oh, you mean like put bass strings on your
Mhm,
guitar.
mhm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Right.
it's the
Right.
bass. It's the bass.
It's the bass.
Yeah.
It's that
So,
low end.
so
And
I,
it, and,
oh,
and and that goes back to what you had said in a previous episode too about like probably from being in the womb. You
mhm.
know, those low frequencies, they drive us on the
Yeah,
inside. They make us vibrate.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I wanted to know his take on who the best bass player is out there.
Not a controversial topic at all.
I want to know what he thinks, and then I want to know what he thinks about all these guys up here, all these famous bass players up here. What
I
he
just
really
want to
thinks
point
of
out that
them.
this image of me is going to be on YouTube. I hope
Are
so.
they? Are they the best or are they not?
Oh hell no.
So this is what he had to say.
All right, take it away.
You have seen some of the best bassists play live. You've sat down to dinner with them. You probably have their numbers on your phone.
No,
So,
I've deleted all the evidence.
being a bass player, I wanted to kind of expand with you on who you think the best bassist is out there. Who do you think is the reigning champ?
Wow, it's such a loaded question because, look, for me, the importance of each individual member of a band is about what the band's message is or what the band's sound is, right? I mean, that's, you could go back and look at Zeppelin and think, okay, John Paul Jones, probably one of the greatest bass players to ever walk the face of the earth, right? But it's because of what he did in that band, and how he filled every gap that he needed to fill, but never overplayed. His bass playing was so melodic. He was very McCartney-esque in the melodies, that he would play, right? But he wasn't singing. He kept himself busy playing keyboards and doing everything else that he was doing, on those records. And he was a great writer, still is. But then I look at guys that are much less credited as great bass players, like Dennis Dunaway from Alice Cooper. Dennis Dunaway may be the greatest bass player that's ever recorded bass parts on records because he's completely unique. There's, in all the years of listening and all the music I listen to, I can't tell you that there's another guy that plays like Dennis Dunaway does. He's completely on his own planet. And that to me is probably the thing that makes bass players great. I mean, Billy Sheehan is a great bass player, right? Hands down, probably the most proficient bassist
Yeah.
that's ever had mainstream success, right? If you were to look at it that way. But is Billy the greatest bass player on the planet? I don't know. Some people don't like the way he plays, other people love it because he's a shred guy and that's what they love. But for me, it's never been about shred. It's been about what's right for the band. Cliff Williams from AC/DC may be the greatest bass player on the planet because he only plays what is absolutely necessary for those songs. And live and on the records, he is the foundation of everything. He and the drummer Phil Rudd are, there's just no more solid rhythm section. Of course, Malcolm's part of that too, but those guys, you can't knock those guys because he just plays a straight bass part. That's what he does, what the bass was intended for, which is hold down the bottom. Dusty Hill from ZZ Top is the same. I mean, Dusty plays some badass grooves on those records, and it's nothing complicated. It's not over the top crazy, but man, could you imagine ZZ Top with anything else? You know what I mean? It doesn't add up. So I guess it's all about how, Ian Hill from Judas Priest, he's another guy. I think Ian Hill has the greatest gig in rock and roll ever. I mean, he has a 3-foot box on the stage that he stands in for the most part. He just throws down every night. And when you see them live, There's a lot more going on with Ian's bass playing than you hear on the records, and until more recently, I think, right? But Ian is just, eh, you know, the other thing about a lot of those guys is they're just the nicest guys in the world, you know, and that's the other thing that I love about my life and the experience that I've had. I've gotten to work for a lot of bands that I grew up listening to, and I have to say that I've never really been disappointed by any of the people that I grew up, you know, putting on a pedestal as a young musician or as just a music fan, you know. So I'm fortunate in that world. I've had other people that I didn't care for at all anyway, kind of live up to exactly what I was expecting. But it's it's so nice when you get into that world and you see these guys that just when they step on stage, it's perfect. So they don't have to play a lot of notes. They don't have to be, you know, they don't have to be, you know, tapping and, you know, slapping and popping and, you know, whatever else. It's what's right for the song, you know, and what's right for the band. You know, I mean, could you imagine AC/DC with Billy Sheehan playing bass? It'd be idiotic, you know. So I think it's just about what's right, you know, for the sound, and that's not for any of us to decide. You
Mhm.
know, that's for us to listen to and go, yeah, I I get that, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, exactly. That was a trick question. You
Yeah,
don't know who the best bassist is because everyone has their own opinion on it, and there's so
yeah,
much there with technique, and then there's so much just being a solid bassist.
yeah,
The best bassist would be somebody that is just solid, who plays the parts well,
mhm,
and you can hang with, and goes well with the band, and
yeah.
it's different for every band. So
Yeah, and it's key in this business. You know, I mean, we talk about this a lot, and I know that you and I have had this discussion over the years too. It's not always about, you know, you don't have to be the best to have this job, right? You know, you just have to be the right person for this situation. And that's the same in the crew world. It's the same in, you know, in the band and musician world. Um, but you know, there are those people that do stand out, you
mhm.
know, and there's those guys that have had different successes in different parts of the business, whether it's live or recording or whatever, you know, where they shine, you know. So
Yeah. Yeah, and there's some really good ones out there. I mean, you mentioned, Paul McCartney and John Paul Jones being at the
yeah,
top just for the melodic, way that they play and how they married everything in the band and
yeah,
kept everything together. And I know from playing all of John Paul Jones's parts that there's so much more in there that you don't even realize until you start really digging
yeah,
deep.
right.
And you can sit there with the headphones on really loud and really try to listen, but until you start playing, you start manipulating the music the way that he did,
Yeah.
then you really start appreciating all the things that were behind it.
Yeah. I mean, you got to remember two things about those guys is one, McCartney was also a singing bass player,
Mhm.
which a lot of people don't give enough credit. Not to, of course, Paul gets all the credit in the world, but the reality is singing bassists, it's a challenge in a lot of ways. And you know this, I mean, you do it, you know, and it's when you're playing counter melody and you have to sing something completely different than what you're playing, it's a lot different than strumming chords and
Mhm.
singing a melody over the top of it when you're actually playing something that's counterintuitive to that whole thing. A
Because
lot of people don't get credit for that, you know.
Yeah, because a lot of bass is melody. It's not just, one single note. And you can do some power chords when you're on, you're playing guitar and singing, but it's not the same when you're trying to really manipulate everything and go with something more melodic.
Right. And there's, you know, the guys that stand out to me. I mean, the reason why I started, I'm a huge Kiss fan, as you know, and one of the reasons why I started to play was because of Gene. And you know, Gene's one of the most maligned bassists on the planet. You know, people mock him and say that he's terrible. You go back and listen to those records though, and then you realize that Gene sings leads on 50% of all the music, wrote 50% of the music, if not more, at different times, sings all the high harmonies on the records, right? Like his falsetto is all over the place, right? And he's to this day, his voice hasn't changed. he hasn't lost anything. He hasn't, you know, it's not like his range has expanded, but the guy can sing and play all day long, you know, and it seems like his creativity is just endless, you know. Um, there's, you know, Geddy Lee is that guy. Like when you sit and think about what he was doing and playing and singing at the same time, playing keys, playing bass, and singing, it's kind of ridiculous, you know, when you think about how separate his brain is when he's doing all this stuff. And I mean, I can't comprehend that as a bassist. I sing, I play, but I struggle to do both at the same time. So it's one of those things that, you know, you got to give people the credit where credit's due, you know, and that's a nuance that a lot of people don't talk about.
Yeah.
You know?
That's definitely the nuance that people don't talk about. And you get into a player like Claypool, of course, you know, he's doing so much different technique over and playing and singing at the same time. It's kind of insane.
Yeah. And it's, you know, and the other thing about him is that it's really, there's nobody that plays like that guy.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, there's people that emulate him now,
Mhm.
but when he came out, I mean, he was on his own trip, you know, his own planet. I mean, you can hear Jocko's influence on, you know, a guy like him, but at the same time, he's just in a totally different planet, you
Kind of
know?
you know, Zappa was just he wanted to do something completely different. I think
Yeah.
Les Claypool, same thing. He just wanted to do something completely different, which makes them amazing, you know.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
they've
It,
paved their own way.
yeah. I mean, it's hard. You don't find too many acts where the bass defines the sound of a band, right? And, or a player defines the sound of something. I mean, James Jamerson maybe was one of the first, you know, in Motown, and it's funny to think about that because when you go back and learn James's stuff, it's his note placement, it's his melody. You can see and hear his influence over everything. But then when you step back and look at the entire Motown picture and the 3 or 4 bass players that played on everything, you kind of look at it and go, wow, how did they, you know, he set the bar and then they found these other people that came in and were just as talented and but kind of defined the same sound. You know, the bass drove the music and a lot of that stuff, and you
Yeah.
know, what gave it the bounce, you know, and special, special stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
John Deacon did a lot of really awesome stuff, and
Yep.
Queen. I mean, he's just. I was learning some Queen and didn't realize how intricate his work was. Duff
Yeah.
McKagan as well. I've learned a lot of Guns N'
Yeah.
Roses. He's extremely intricate in the way he plays.
Duff's
Um,
got a style of his own too. You know, another guitar player that turned to bass. You know, the punk influence is all over his playing.
yeah, and you can tell his
Yeah.
punk influence by the way he uses his pick. It's all kind of downstrokes and it's
Yeah.
just low, and he's just total punk.
Yep.
But he turned those bass lines into something, you know, super memorable.
Yeah.
Some of the bass lines are noted as the best bass lines in rock and roll history.
Just fits the songs, right? He found the gaps. He played what fit. He's got melodic aspects to his playing. He's got a great percussive aspect to his playing without it being that slap and pop
Yeah.
thing, you know. And it's just that aggressive punky nature that he approaches it with, you know. And but then I mean you think of all the big ballads that they had too, and his playing's just perfect on all of those,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, those are kind of for bassists, those ballads are can be kind of boring.
Sometimes, yeah,
So,
he keeps it pretty interesting though. He's got God, you know, like you think about. I don't know if "Sweet Child of Mine's" really a ballad, but that bass part, that intro part, and the fills that he plays throughout the song. I mean, they keep the song moving. You
absolutely.
know that melodic intro that he plays. It's again one of the most identifiable bass parts of all time.
Yeah, and
You
he
know,
yeah, when you're going from like a 1-4-5 song structure to keep things interesting, you really do have to have some good fills in there. And I think
yeah,
Duff has done that really well over the years for
yeah.
sure.
And you know, and you got to talk about guys like Cliff Burton. You know what we could have heard from him if he was still alive. You know,
Yeah, absolutely.
Geezer Butler. You know, I mean, the Sabbath and Cooper, Kiss and Aerosmith are probably the 4 bands that I've learned the most songs from
Mhm.
you know, since I started to play bass when I was 9 or 10, however young I was when that happened. But those four bass players are, I don't know if there's anything that defined rock more, you know. I mean, John Paul Jones, of course, has got to be in that discussion, but for me, those four bands were the bands that I grew up, you know,
Heavy.
loving. And then Deep Purple,
Mhm.
which was like this eye-opening thing for me that was just like, because there was an element of progressiveness in their music, but they were a rock band. They didn't on record, they never got really proggy. It was about rock songs. You know, the riffs were straightforward and catchy and legendary. And the bass playing behind that big keyboard, the big guitar riffs, you know, Roger Glover and Glenn Hughes, you
Yeah.
know, just two completely different guys, completely different styles. But man, some of the best recorded rock songs of all time in that short little window, you know, 70 to 76.
Yeah.
And then, you know, 84, Perfect Strangers, Perpendicular is another one where Roger Glover's playing on it. Is just, that's a later album with Steve Morse on guitar. But if you're a Purple fan or you don't know a lot about Deep Purple, that record will blow your mind. You
Yeah.
know, the whole band is just on fire, and some of the bass parts are just beautiful parts, you know.
So at 9 or 10 years old, when you decided to play bass, why did you pick bass instead of guitar?
I didn't have a musical bone in my body, right? I didn't have a family member that was a musician, anything like that. It was just something, music just kind of hit a chord with me really young. And I was so into it that I just wanted to do something that I wanted to play. I wanted to learn something, you know. And I was, you know, I was a huge Kiss fan, and Gene was the be all end all. You know, it was like, look at this guy, you know, look at that. And it wasn't, I didn't know anything about if he was a good player or not. I just knew that his presence,
Uh-huh.
the songs, you know, like there was stuff that it just spoke to me as a kid,
It's like
right?
a little boy who loves kids.
Yeah. Yeah. I was like, you know, yeah. And they weren't even in makeup when I was growing up. You know what I mean? Like I got into them. I got into them at the end of that, you know, and nobody was like, oh yeah. But it was,
Jewish man with hairy chest.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it was just that there was something just that spoke to me about it. You know, I remember seeing them on like, I remember the movie being on TV when I was really little. And I remember seeing them when they took their makeup off, like on Entertainment Tonight and all that kind of stuff. I was, you know, 6 or 7. And there was just something about them that when I went to buy my first record, I knew them, you know. Oh, hey, I know who that is. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I want that, you know. And then I would, you know, um, and that started a lifelong, you know, obsession or you know, fandom with that band. And yeah, and I still love them to this day. You know, they're one of those bands that I can always go back to. And I don't know, I never, you know, I hear a lot of people say, oh, you know, I grew out of that. I don't listen to them anymore. I'm like, "Well, they just write great songs, you know, whether you like them or not. They're great 3.5 minute rock songs, catchy, and they've done it forever,
Uh,
you know.
they've marked their territory.
I can't, I honestly, like, as much music as I listen to, the bands that I always go back to, you know, Aerosmith and Kiss, Deep Purple, they're still making records, you
They're
know.
classic. There's
Yeah.
something about them that can't really easily be reproduced. I mean, it can be reproduced, but not the way that they do it. It doesn't stand out as well as when they do it. And they have their fan base and they've been able to
I mean,
last the time.
ACDC is the same. You know, I mean, look at this new record that they just put out.
Their new record is the same.
It's like,
Easy. Why would it be anything different?
but it's unbelievable. You know, it's like they, you know, they put out albums where they haven't had as many great songs or whatever it is, but this record is just like, it's from top to bottom. It's just one of those things where you're like, wow, like they, and you know what's strange is that they've had so much up and down, you know, crazy tragedy in their career, and successes and tragedies happen, and it's like they're, if they get hit with something, they come back even stronger.
Yeah.
And it's just, that's an unbelievable trait that a lot of musicians do not have, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
That's something that I have to give them, you know, huge tip of the hat, you
Mhm.
know. And it's, I can't pick another band that's got the milestones that they have, and it's, think about it, it's just hard. It's hard to come up with anything. So, and it's just a great, I love going back to those things. There's something familiar about them. There's something that no matter what you listen to in between, it's like, this is your base, and then is part of it because of these guys that we're talking about today? Yeah, of course. I mean, all the bands that we just talked about have had the same guy playing bass from day one, from their recorded careers, and does it help? Does it help keep an identity? Sure.
Yeah.
So,
I think so, for sure. So you've been able to tour with some of the best bass players in the business. So how do you feel being a bass player and sitting on the sidelines backstage and hearing these guys play over and over every night for years? How do you feel about some of these badasses going out there? Do you think that they've really stepped up to the challenge? Or you think that there's other people out there that could do a better job? Or how do you feel?
I mean, I've gotten to watch some guys, some that I never knew of. I mean, there was a guy that played upright bass for the big band for Brian Setzer, right? I did the Jump Jive and Wail tour as a merch guy, and I was like 20. I was 21 when that 21, 22, and Mark Winchester was this Nashville session guy, right? And he had taught himself to play upright bass for that gig. Like, it wasn't that he was like, yeah, I'm this accomplished upright bass player. He went out, taught himself so that he could audition. And every night when I'd watch that guy, he did this solo during a breakdown of Stray Cat Strut that would just blow your mind, as an upright bass player, right? And it's that's a completely different instrument, but the purpose is the same. The upright and the way you approach it, the way you play, it's a whole different technique. It's a whole different animal, but the guy blew me away every night, I worked with Velvet Revolver and got to see Duff do his thing every night. I've, and then seen him with Guns. Todd Kearns, who plays with Slash, again, a guitar player that plays bass, but Todd
he's special.
He really is. Yeah. Because I mean, the singing, the high harmony parts that he does, his energy live, the guy's just a natural born rock star, right? And I've seen Slash's solo band more than I've seen anybody else, because I was with him for the first 3 years of that thing and helped him put it together in the beginning. And Brent Fitz brought Todd in, right? I brought Brent in, Brent brought Todd in. And when I saw Todd perform for the first time, I'm going, like, this guy, and we used to call him the secret weapon, because he's just
the secret weapon.
He's so, like, when you're watching that band on stage, you're drawn to him, right? It's just that kind of thing. And I've seen that band. I must have seen like 400 gigs. Yeah. I can't even tell you how many shows we did in those 3 years. I mean, from 2010, 11, and 12.
Yeah. I got to see it.
Yeah. We were on the road. We were on the road for 10 months a year. I mean, we did shows. And, the other thing about Todd is he's one of the most beautiful humans that you'll ever meet. I love him to death. He's one of the funniest people I've ever known. He and I had a lot of laughs together over the years. And, I was also the one that went to every hospital in Europe on days off with him when he had his detached retina. I mean, we would sit together in emergency room waiting rooms for 9 hours, and just like, but, we were making sure that he was okay to keep going, or if we had to get him home. And the only way to do that was to see a doctor every day. And it wasn't like we weren't in places where there was a doctor who was an optometrist that was a rock fan that we could call and have come in. So yeah, we spent a lot of time together just in the oddest circumstances,
I got to see him at NAMM this year. I got to give him a hug, say hi.
Yeah. I just saw him last month. I went out there and visited for a couple of days, and we got to sit and have a coffee together with him and Brent and Frank. Nice. And we laughed. It's just, you pick up, because we have this bond. We spent all this time together. I mean, it was I spent more time with them than I did with anybody else in my life those 3 years, you know, and it was fun because those guys were the guys that on days off, like we were always together. You know, we would go and do things together. We would go have meals. We would go to record stores. We would, you know, whatever. We, you know, go and see things. That was what we did. And I mean, I took that whole band to the Vatican. You know, it's just one of the weirdest. It was a. It's just such a weird moment. Yeah, you know, Slash and Miles and oh, it's just the weirdest thing, you know. But those moments were great. You know, those are great moments. You know, and we used to have this thing together. I guess it's an important thing to understand Todd's sense of humor and his gift, right? So for years, the first 2 years of the tour, I mean, they would open with Ghost most of the time. So there's this big drum fill, and then the guitar comes in, and the bass lays back, right, until the verse kicks in. Mm-hmm. So I would do my intros. Mm-hmm. I would do the, you know, that whole thing, and are you ready to, you know, that whole.
If anyone's listening or watching or listening, and they've been to a Slash show, this was the voice behind the
solo bands, and I was only doing it as a tribute to McBob, who had done it for years with Guns N' Roses and Velvet Revolver, because he wasn't out with us. So for me, I was the only one that was like, hey, you got to do this. And I'm like,
that's the radio voice.
Oh yeah. So I just went up and did the whole, you know, but I mean, again, huge Kiss fan. And McBob's whole thing was always kind of like making fun of the Kiss intro, right? Like it was kind of like a tribute, but, you know, tongue in cheek way of doing it. So yeah, I just went up and I was like, yeah, all right. And in the beginning, we didn't have a band name. So it was just Slash featuring Miles Kennedy and these other guys, right? So every night I would just make up a band name. And if anybody has any of the live recordings from that tour, you can listen to them all, and they're a different band every night, you know. And I just and whatever it was, I tried to come up with something that would make Todd laugh before he would go into the song, because he would hear me in his ears, you know, and I would even go over, sometimes I would start talking to him while he was supposed to be, you know, and just to get him laughing before it started, you know. And that was the relationship that we had, and that's why we're still friends now, you know. And I admire him so much. If you don't know who Todd Kearns is, just go buy the Took records.
He has his own Canada Day.
Yeah. I mean, he's got his rock star on the Canadian Rock Hall of Fame, and I mean, the guy, he's
amazing. I definitely want to get him on the show for sure.
Yeah, and you know, the Took song, the original song is Never Enough. Mm-hmm. It's one of the greatest, I would say, melodic rock songs that I've heard in 30 years. Mm-hmm. And it's, you know, that's a tribute to all of them in the band, but Todd's vocal is the part that you're going to sit back and go, wow. And just, you know, he's just a great rock singer, you know, and he's on the new Dave Ellefson record. He's popping up all over the place now. Like, people are starting to realize, like, this guy's, you know, he's the real deal. Yeah. One of the other guys that I have to mention in here, who I think that doesn't get the credit he deserves, is Rudy Sarzo.
Rudy, yeah.
Everybody knows Rudy. Everybody loves him. If you know him as a person, he's just this beautiful, beautiful person. I honestly, I don't know anyone who in this business that I think has a bigger heart than Rudy Sarzo, right? And I don't know if that means anything to anybody, but Rudy's always been maligned as he's the live guy. He's not on a lot of records, you know, for whatever reason. It's just been the way that his career has gone. But I will say this, when you listen to Rudy play and you listen to the variety of what he can do and how he throws down, Rudy's one of the most talented bass players that you're ever going to come across. Yeah. But, you know, people give him this hard time about, well, he's always on tour, but he's never on the records. Well, you know, let's look at it from another angle. Who was the bass player that played on the record then, and why aren't they out there? Probably because they were an asshole that nobody wanted to take on the road with them, you know. And Rudy is not that guy. Rudy is, you know, he's played with Ozzy, he's played with Quiet Riot, he played with Dio, he played with Whitesnake. He's in the Guess Who. And I got to recommend him for that gig, right? And we did Monster Circus together in 2008, 2009. I got to put together a band of guys that I grew up listening to do this Vegas show, right? And for all the wrong reasons, the show didn't happen and it didn't last because there, too many cooks in the kitchen, backstabbing bullshit from other people. I mean, one of the guys that I brought into the show was involved in that. And he's a guy that I grew up listening to. And I hate the fact that I think of him now when I look at that guy and I see him and we still talk and we buried the hatchet, but I still will always think of that, of his backstabbing bullshit when I think of him.
Yeah.
So there's this scar in there for that. Rudy was a gem, he was one of those guys that, like, as a kid, again, huge Whitesnake fan. How could you not be when you were a kid and that 87 record came out and they were all in those videos? And Quiet Riot, the first hard rock band ever have a #1 album. You know what I mean? And Ozzy, the tribute stuff, those records were defining albums of that time. Rudy's on Metal Health, part of it, most of it. He's on the tribute record, the Ozzy Randy Rhoads tribute album. And he was the touring bassist in Whitesnake and played on, Slip of the Tongue. But it was his face, it was his persona, again, he's another guy with a stage presence that is unmatched. There's a performance that comes with Rudy Sarzo that you're not going to get from anybody else, just one of the greatest people that I've ever encountered in this business, and we had a lot of them though, we had a great band of guys, but Rudy, for me as a bass player, I got to watch Rudy play all these songs live every night, and it was cool because here he is, he's Rudy Sarzo, but he's playing Motley Crue, he's playing Ozzy songs, he's playing Whitesnake songs, Quiet Riot, Velvet Revolver, Guns N' Roses, Great White, whatever, Twisted Sister, Cinderella tracks, all these guys that were in the band, and Rudy was the guy holding it down the whole time. And it was all these different styles, and he would go out there and just kill it, and there's a guy that if all I ever did was get to tour as a bass player, I'd be okay with that. I'm getting to play live. I'm getting to play in front of people. There's a lot of guys that, you could be a great session player. You could be great in the studio. But again, if you don't fit in, you don't go on the road,
Yeah. And that's kind of how I wanted to encompass that last question as well. There's nobody that's going to be the best out there. It's really just who's right for the job and who's a good hang. If we did this whole thing on YouTube, Zepparella, and we did this like tips for bands, and it was like 50 something tips for bands, and it was basically, you've got to be a good hang, you've got to be cool, you've got to play your part, you've got to be part of the band, you've got to know your stuff. Independently, you need to be a good bassist, but you also have to be a good musician and a good team player.
Absolutely.
And even though you're saying, Rudy's awesome and Todd is awesome, and Todd probably has more tricks up his sleeve as far as things he can do, but because Rudy can still do everything and he's such a gem, they're both really awesome and doing, getting gigs.
Yeah, it's funny because Rudy is probably the epitome of playing what needs to be played for his gig, right? I mean, so he comes into Whitesnake. He's inherited already a 10-year band, right? That's had multiple bass players throughout their history already. He comes in and does the tour, delivers all of that stuff. Ozzy, Bob Daisley recorded those 2 solo records, the first 2. And Bob's an incredible player, plays on the upbeat a lot. Again, the early Whitesnake bass player was the same kind of thing. And Neil Murray, and Rudy comes in and just, okay, bam. But does it in a way where he goes out on stage live and steals the show.
Mhm.
I mean, can you imagine you're in a 3-piece band? You've got your front man, you've got Tommy Aldridge as your drummer, and you've got Randy Rhoads as the guitar player, and it's just the three of you up
Mhm.
there, and then Ozzy in the front doing his thing. Like that band, those three guys on stage together, when you really think about it in the hard rock world and the rock world, you have to consider that to be one of the greatest lineups of all time.
Yeah.
Right? And it maybe not at that time. Maybe they didn't realize at that time who these three guys all were. But now, 40 years later, it's pretty amazing when you look back at that and think that those three guys were in that band on stage together.
Yeah.
I mean, David Lee Roth's solo band was pretty impressive. Sheehan and Greg Bisnett and Steve Vai. Different thing,
Yeah.
but perfect for Dave. I mean, I can't imagine Dave's songs having the impact that they had without that lineup being a part of it. You know what I mean? It's just that special. Again, the perfect situation.
Yeah.
To me, Steve Vai doesn't belong anywhere else. He did not belong in Whitesnake. He doesn't belong in anybody else's band.
Yeah.
The only band that I ever could see him in as a member of a band is David Lee Roth.
Yeah.
And he's great as a solo act. He does his own thing, but he's never been able to do it again in a band. And that band was a perfect band for that guy.
Yeah.
So I look at that Ozzy lineup as the same thing. It's kind of every lineup of Ozzy's band since then they aspire to be that band live. They might not be on the records together. They might, it might be one or two of them, but the Blizzard of Oz touring band is the band that every band that Ozzy had afterwards, like I want it to be as good as that.
Yeah.
And Don Airy, of course, on keys up in the the pulpit of the castle up above the stage,
Do you think there's ever been a band that you can recall that was worse if they lost after they lost an incredible bassist? Anything comes?
That's a loaded question, right? All right. So I'm gonna answer it like this because it's changed. Like a lot of these bands kind of they go through all these things, and I'm just thinking the stuff that we've been talking about. I'm sure if that was a prep question, I'm sure I could go back and look at it and think about, this is I can't imagine Guns N' Roses without Duff. I can't imagine Black Sabbath, even though it's been done without Geezer Butler, but it's just not the same. They've had 1,000 different singers, and they've always managed to sound somewhat like Black Sabbath, but without Geezer and Bill, or without Geezer and Vinny.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't imagine Kiss without Gene. I've seen Van Halen without Michael Anthony, and Wolfie is an incredible talented bass player and guitarist. He's incredibly talented anyway, but it just was a different thing, and it's, I can't imagine Aerosmith without Tom Hamilton. I just can't. Deep Purple changed when Roger Glover left and Glenn Hughes came in as a different animal, but Burn is still one of the greatest records that they ever did. That's with Glenn. But the Roger Glover, Ian Gillan lineup of that band is the definitive lineup because of their songwriting, because of their, whatever it is, that was the magic, right? I don't know.
So you're saying bass is important?
I would like to think so. I mean, but I think it's the chemistry. I mean, it's what we talk about all the time. It's like, oh, if it's not the original guys, blah, blah, blah. Well, I can't agree with that.
Yeah.
I do think that bands have succeeded in going on without the original members. And I'm a fan. I'm fine with that. Like I want to hear the music.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I even loved going to see lineups of Thin Lizzy without Phil. Because I wanted to hear the friggin' songs, Phil couldn't be there, I mean, Metallica suffered when they lost Cliff. Jason was he was the right pick. He was the right guy. They treated him like shit. He should have been all over And Justice for All. The bass sound should have been
And
as in your face as anything else they had done. Yeah.
and
And,
just
and
have you heard that? And just
which
we talked about it in our last podcast. There's an album online. It's called Injustice for Jason, and it actually has the right bass parts in it. It has
where it's been the remix.
phenomenal.
Yeah. And you know what? The Black Album, they changed, the music changed so much, but the Black Album was a brilliant record, right? And people are they can shit talk it all day long. It's not heavy enough. It doesn't sound like, it's not as progressive as the other stuff was. That's fine. They still wrote great songs on it. Now, they lost me after the Black Album. I think they've been chasing it since then. I think that Def Leppard has been chasing Hysteria since Hysteria came out, right? I mean, and they're, but that's just my opinion. You know, that's, as a music fan, those are records that, you know, sometimes you can't recover from those moments.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Guns has been chasing Appetite, and that's their debut. You know, I mean, and that's, there's stuff that, you know, Deep Purple may have been chasing Machine Head and Burn, and, you know, and they've had those moments, you know, the Perfect Strangers, the Perpendiculars, those records that should be considered in their top 5 because of that, you know. It's just a hard thing. Like for me, well, I grew up a Kiss fan. The original 2, you know, those other 2 bums, they got kicked out of the band or they got fired or whatever. And they, you know, and that's, the band carried on. I grew up on the decade after where they were still selling millions of records because these other, you know, and they had other guys in the band. And it's hard for me to accept that argument, you know. There's always someone that can take your place.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
I mean, it's that way, whether you're a musician or whether you're a crew guy or in anything, you know, in life. And if you're a husband or a wife, there's always somebody that can take your place, you know.
Which I think is a very important thing to say is, you know, even though you might be a good or okay bassist, if you're not a good hang, you will be replaced. But if you're a badass bassist and you're a shitty person, you're probably going to be replaced. It's happened many times before.
You know, people don't realize you live together when you do this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, I live on a bus or, you know, whatever with 12 other people.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes it's a band, sometimes it's crew.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you're a pain in the ass or you're somebody that causes problems all the time, you're not going to last.
No.
You'll get another job because, oh, look at this guy's resume. He worked for this guy and these people. And yeah, but sometimes that doesn't last because of who you are, you know, and that part is, you know, that's the mystery of the business, right? That's what it comes down to in the end is, if you fit in, if you can live with everybody else, you know, if you can do that without being a nuisance. And in a band situation, you know, yeah, you have to have that chemistry. I mean, that all gets poured into what makes the records. And if you don't have any songs, then you're nothing anyway. It doesn't make a difference.
Exactly.
You know? And I mean, you know, there's so many of those little nuances that people forget about or don't think about because, you know, you're listening to the albums. People don't think about that stuff until they're like, oh, what happened to so-and-so? You know, I mean, the guy from the Rival Sons, the original bass player, he was phenomenal. I mean, when you listen to those first few records, you're like, wow, this guy was, again, off the charts, you know, on his own planet. But they found a guy to take his place that is just as amazing. But that guy set the bar, right? So this helped define our sound. We have to have somebody that can do this. Otherwise, you know.
That's true.
So
awesome. Well, that was some really awesome information from you today. I really appreciate your
information. Oh, I've given you information that you didn't know about. Yeah. I'll tell you what, before we leave, there's one guy that I suggest people check out as a bassist who most people probably don't know. There was a band called Union for a very short period of time at the end of the 90s. John Corabi, Bruce Kulick, Brent Fitz from Slash's band before anybody knew who he was. The bass player's name was Jamie Hunting.
Okay.
Jamie has played with Roger Daltrey since then. He played with Vince Neil for a little while with Brent. Jamie's his own, guy. I've never really met him. I've just heard crazy stories about him. He's just, one of those kind of guys. But as a bass player, the guy has his own unique approach to what they did. He's a piano player as well. So there's definitely some interesting aspects of what he chooses to play behind music because he looks at it from a melodic standpoint, but with a real sense of bass. And if you listen to what he did on those 2 studio records, it's mind blowing, right? Like there's just some moments in there where you're like, where did that come from? Who even would think of that, to put that in there? And just hugely underrated. He'll never be heard. Those records are, they're already obscure and hard to find, but there's a lot of talent on those 2 albums, and his bass playing was huge on those things. So definitely something to check out if you're a bassist.
Okay, for sure.
There you go.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, it was fun to do this.
So that was my awesome interview with Pete Merluzzi, who has been on tour since he was out of college, pretty much, and then he became a tour accountant and tour manager, and he's done it all and seen it all. So pretty good insights.
Yeah, and making sure that we all know about the total package.
Yeah, the total package of a bass player. It's not just that you can play the songs. It's you've got to look the part for the band. You've got to play the parts well. You've got to be a good hang. You've got to, know your role as a bass player. You have to know all of that stuff. And that's kind of what this show is for. It's to kind of open eyes where, if you're going to play bass, you might as well play it right, because it's a big instrument and it's big shoes to fill. And some of the people he named are some of the best electric bassists on the planet. And I think that some of the ones that he named are the underdogs as well. Are just, you really have to take into account that there's some people out there that are doing some big stuff.
And I'd like to point out too, you said you just have to, if you're going to play bass, play it right, right? That's subjective. Just like who the best bass player is. It's subjective. But, people always get so heated on who's the best and well, they're all the best, right? It's just who's the best fit. That's what it really means. When you say who's the best at anything, it's really just who's the best fit, for that song, for that band, for that tour, for that album. Some people are the best fit in the studio and they suck going on the road with.
Yeah.
And because of that, they need another bass player who's the best fit for the tour, but maybe he's not the best fit for the studio, but yet they both, bring their take to it. And that's another thing too, is like you spoke about how you like to hear a band live sound like they do on their album. I used to hate that in the beginning, listening to albums and then going and seeing a band live. And it's just not the same band. There's a couple bands, I don't want to name them because it's not the most positive thing about a band, but there's been a few bands where, their albums are phenomenal. And then maybe they have a lot of samples, they have a lot of, low end, all that programming, right? And then you go and see them live and they're just like a shitty hardcore band. And the songs don't sound anything like that.
Yeah, that's my biggest pet peeve in rock right now is the bands that don't really look like how they sound.
Well, you mean like all of them?
Well, for instance, no, I'm not going to name names, but
right.
when you see them, and I'd say guys because I don't see a bunch of girls doing this, but guys up there with a bunch of, like, they look like they're in a goth band, but they're singing love songs.
Well, that's just The Cure, girl. You just showed up.
Get it? No, The Cure is totally different. I mean, they have their own like thing. That was the 80s, but like now, I don't know. I mean, I would think that those guys would sing something like The Cure, but they don't. It's just weird.
I want to.
But it's their thing. It's their thing.
People who don't look the part, if we want to try and be like super relevant, Have you seen that Machine Gun Kelly performance with Travis Barker?
I have not.
So he plays guitar now. He plays
Mhm.
a Pink Schecter now.
I saw him
Uh,
get killed in a movie a couple days ago.
he Stevie T made a YouTube video about how bad his 1 millimeter off bend sounded. Because when you get so close, but yet you're so far, and he hit the solo, he does a bend, and you were like,
Oh,
it makes you make the sour face,
yeah.
right? But I want to petition. I think everybody should go to Machine Gun Kelly's Twitter and at Bass Cafe with Holly and Dean. I'm just gonna tell you right now. I take it offense that when he did that performance that there was no bass player and he played guitar like shit like that. If he had a bass player, maybe the bass player could have done a bass slide and saved his solo. No, no live bass player. No respect.
No respect. Yeah, I mean, I understand, you want to be, I mean, I don't mind two
That's
pieces,
two S bombs in this
but
episode, by the way. I don't know if I'm feeling froggy
feeling
or
froggy.
yeah,
I
I'm
think
feeling.
I did one. I think I did one. Does that help? Does that hurt us? I don't know, but
Nah.
anyways, so yeah, basically you've got to have the full package. If you get the bassist primary role is to have the full package.
Yeah.
Pretty
Yeah.
much.
Be the total package. Like, and this, just like a lot of our tips and tricks, everything is focused at the viewpoint of a bass player, but all of this can be taken across, like a lot of these morals can be taken across all band members,
Mhm.
right? Everybody needs to be the total package. That's
Yeah.
where, again, we're going to come into, well, who's the best? The best fit? Well, the guy who, or girl, or gal, or they, or non, they have to fit in every aspect. We have to find the groove. We have to expand the vocals. We have to cover up the guitars. We have to guide the drummer back on if the drummer's working off backing tracks, and I've had this happen, the backing tracks go down. If the drummer has his in-ears in, he can't always hear what's going on, even if the backing track stops, unless he like is able to pull it out. But if you're a band that has no amps on stage and your drummer's working off backing tracks, his drums are probably playing louder than your monitor all the way up in the front of the stage. And there's times when we have to go over there and be the visual cue with
Yeah.
the drummer to get everyone, on target.
Yeah.
Um, it's really, really important. We become that glue. That's really our job. We're going to say it very many times across these episodes. If you want to be a good bass player, be the glue that binds everyone. And always be willing to cover up someone's mistake when you're in a band. When you're in a band, that's the objective. We're all supposed to work off each other and get each other's backs, in melody and in rhythm.
Yep.
And sometimes, fourth time, shit happens.
Yeah, exactly. It's true. Yeah, we look at the way Paul McCartney, uh, plays his bass parts. John Paul Jones plays his bass parts. They're marrying the music. They're marrying the bass and the drums and the vocals. They're marrying everything together. They're really making sure that the glue is there. And I think they figured it out. Those two definitely did.
I love it too because for a bass player, and we talked about this a little bit in the first episode, we have different ways that we can add bass to a song, right? You can play an upright,
Mhm.
you can play, oh man, like one of my favorites, Pink Floyd and the fretless bass.
Yeah.
Um, what there's just a few songs where you hear the bass sliding in and providing this leading melody. In The Show Must Go On by
Hmm.
Queen, I play that with Nita Strauss live at tons of gigs. That the intro of that song, it's very like a very fast moving, not fast moving, but it's a very like moving bass line, it speaks, as well as providing rhythm, as well as not always moving on the one. You know, some of those scale runs, they go on a triplet beat while the rest of the band is pushing a 4/4. You know, like that's a whole other aspect of it, you know, being that in between.
Yeah. Yeah. The sweet spot.
Yeah.
The bass is the sweet spot.
To quote Mudvayne, the space between a blink and a tear, death blooms.
There you go.
So one of the most important things about being the total package is practice. Know the material.
Yeah.
You can't be the glue for a band if you don't know what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
If you don't know what you're supposed to be doing so much to the point where you could do it in your sleep, then when stuff goes awry in the set, you won't know how to recover, right? You have to be able to know everything inside and out. You have to have played the song so many times that you've already made all the mistakes in all of the different spots. So you know, like, if you mess up coming out of the chorus, or if that drummer's drum fill throws you off, or if you know that the drummer, every time he does this one fill live, he improvises it. And sometimes it's like a beat longer. Sometimes it's a beat, you know, earlier. And that happens all the time, you know, like there's so many drummers that get gigs and then they improvise on a fill. And sometimes they hit an extra note.
Yeah.
And that's the band that has to fix. It's not the drummer, right? Drums are the most noticeable. I've been teaching this to my students for years. If the drums mess up, the band has to correct to the drums.
Yeah.
The drums don't correct.
No.
The drums just keep going, and the band shifts back onto the drums.
There's a funny story that Zepparilla tells, and I'll tell it because we've told it in stuff before, so I don't think they would mind. But there was a show that they were doing, and they all agreed on the first song, but Clem, our drummer, thought it was The Rover, and then the other bandmates thought it was Houses of the Holy. So she started out with The Rover, and they started out in it for a while. A very, because they thought that Clem would get back on track, and Clem thought they would get back on track, and it just never happened.
Yeah, we call that in the industry a remix.
It's a remix.
Or a mashup, right?
A mashup.
The European single edition. The extended producer's cut.
The producer's cut, that's what that was. So, yeah.
Blues and Jew, watch me for the changes.
I've been talking a lot about practicing and how your brain works on my podcast. This last podcast that I did for Holly's podcast. And, you know, the brain doesn't know when you mess up. It just knows what information you're putting in. It's like an input, right? So if you're doing a run and you mess up on a part, your mind thinks that it's correct. But you know that you need to go back and do it, right? So it puts this thing.
It's funny. I feel like we just talked about this maybe in a text message or something about typos, right?
Yeah.
Like when we make mistakes, and that's another like great point is like record yourself. Because so many times I've been playing or learning a band's material, and I think I'm doing it right because I'm listening to the song and I'm playing, and I don't realize that I'm hitting this one note wrong because my brain is just filling in the mistakes.
Yeah.
You know? And then you record yourself and listen back, and when you're not playing, you're like, oh, wait a minute. That sounds off.
Crap.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's actually a thing called the myelin sheath, and it basically coats whatever you're doing, whatever synapses, whatever information is going on in that synapses, it coats it and it like locks it in. This is an actual thing that happens. So the best way to practice is to practice so slow that you don't make any mistakes. then your brain will learn it with no mistakes, and then you can go faster. So slow down to go faster.
That's golden rule. In all the years that I've been teaching, it was one of the best things that I ever learned way
Yeah.
back in the day when I was trying to learn like sweep picking and stuff.
Mhm.
And I
But
do
it's
sweep
just
style
loud.
picking on bass as well. Like you have to go slow. If you want, I have this little thing that I get into on my Patreon at patreon.com/Dean Music Official. But I have this great little group of vlogs and blogs that I'm going to be posting up there, and one of them is called Dean's List, and they're like these little phrases that I come up with to help my students, because I found as I was teaching, I would just repeat a lot of the same stuff, so I started writing it down. And
Cute.
one of my favorite quotes, I'm going to try and remember it off the top of my head, but if you want to run with sea legs, first you must learn to crawl with crutches. Right? It's like super complex in that thought, but if you've anyone who's ever been on a boat that's on the waves and they try to run, they'll understand that. Like if you want to like be on a tour bus while it's in a construction zone, you have to have your sea legs, right? And in order to do that, you have to go really slow. You really, really, really have to go slow.
Yeah.
It's the best thing that you can do as a musician.
Well, scientifically, this is why you have to. Like your brain doesn't work any other way.
Right, and I love typo negative, right? And nobody goes slower than them.
No.
Nobody. If you have not heard it yet,
His
there's a
voice.
song they cover. They cover "She's So Heavy." It's like a mashup song that they do. But they cover "She's So Heavy" by the Beatles. And at the end of the song, every time around, they get like 5 or 10 beats per minute slower. And they do it like 7 or 8 times. Like you think every time that it's the last one because it's so slow, and then it goes and gets
Oy.
lower.
Heavy.
Anybody can play fast. Not everyone can play slow.
That's truth. That's the truth.
Yep.
That's because a lot of people fumble through their fast playing.
Going slower is harder. Hate to be the bearer
Yeah.
of bad news for everyone who wants to be like, thunder files with their picks or their fingers.
Mm. Well, the reason we don't want to go slow is because it's exactly the opposite of what we want to do, right? We want to play it at time, or we want to play it faster than time, just to know that we know it. But it's the complete opposite of what we want to do. So, but if you have patience, patience is a virtue. Like if you can
Hell of
be
a drug.
patient, if you can be patient and work on little things, it doesn't really take you that much longer. It would take you longer to mess up 10 times than it will to get it down once and play it through a couple more times, and you're fine.
Nita has a rule of thumb where she says she plays something 5 times before she either speeds, like 5 times without a single mistake,
Mhm.
until she either like speeds it up or moves on.
Yeah.
And it's crazy because you can play something 5 times with no mistakes if you play it super slow,
Mhm.
quicker than you can play it 1,000 times,
The
double the
wrong.
speed with a bunch of mistakes. Like
Yeah.
it's you're
Yeah.
better off doing it that way, and it's that muscle memory.
Uh-huh. It's a muscle memory, and your brain remembers where it messes up, and it thinks that it did the right thing, so it's going to continue to mess up in that spot until you go slow and actually, lock it in your brain, basically.
For sure, for sure. And like so much of that just comes with when you have something that is on your plate, whatever it is, drill.
Drill.
Drill it, drill it, drill it, drill it over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah, and I talk a lot about the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. And, if you have a growth mindset, you're going to learn a lot more. A fixed mindset doesn't really learn a lot. They think that everything's just if they're not good, everything's against them, and they don't have any talent anyways, and whatever. But a growth mindset knows that talent is disguised as practice. And if you have a growth mindset, you're going to sit down, you're going to deliberately practice things that make you better, and you will get better.
Yeah, you're supposed to practice the things that you suck at, and unfortunately, we never want to do that
You know what I
because we
do?
suck at it. You
Exactly.
know, and most musicians, like, we're usually not beaming with self-confidence. Like, not, some are, but not all are. Like, it takes a certain kind of personality to lock yourself in your room for 10 hours a day and play your guitar and not. So pre-COVID, like, not associating with people. um it used to be strange. It used to be strange to be locked in your room and just sit and hone a skill for years.
Mhm.
um you get rumors spread about you in high school and stuff, like, what, why
Too much
does this
time.
crazy gothic kid ever come out? It's because he's sitting home playing guitar, and then
Who's
in
the
10
crazy
years
gothic kid?
and then in 10 years you're going to be hitting him up for, like, guest list at the show because they play for someone, and you're just some, you know union
One
worker who hates their life.
you beef with somebody? No, just kidding.
Maybe a cup
No,
of two
I think
truth.
it just always happens. It always happens that way, you know?
Yeah.
It's like because the people who play the instruments are usually the artistic type and very introverted. Most, not all of them, but some very introverted and very, just not. They're not the life of the party. But what happens is when they put on their record and you really like it, they all of a sudden become the leader of the pack. So,
And that stuff is sometimes, like, indescribable about how it comes out too. Like,
Mhm.
for those who have seen me on stage, I'm a nutbag. I'm crazy. You know, depending on the gig, I've tamed it down here and there, but I like to go, I one of my favorite bands of all time is like Nine Inch Nails. And not so much Nine Inch Nails from 2020, but Nine Inch Nails from like 98, 99,
Yeah,
97. And
yeah.
all they did was trash the stage.
Mhm.
Like, that's the band that I liked, the band that came onto the stage, trashed everything,
Mhm.
went ape. The music still sounded awesome as the gear was breaking along the way.
Yeah.
You know, you go to a Nine Inch Nails concert, and if you're anywhere in the first 20 rows, you're gonna get a key from a keyboard that got shattered, and they just, like, keep rolling the keyboards in, like, that's just the type of stuff that I always gravitated towards. But you have to, if you're gonna do that, right, you have to be so well practiced with your music that you can do that stuff,
Yeah, absolutely.
right? And
Absolutely. Yeah. There's many times where part of my practice was standing up with my bass, playing
listen up, kids.
the music as I'm dancing along to the song. Like it's a dress rehearsal basically with nobody there. It's so important. And like you were saying, you got to eat, sleep, breathe it, and when you're, you got to dream about it. Like if you're not able to do it in your sleep, then you need to be able to do it in your sleep. You need to take a little bit of extra time and really, really get it down.
Yeah, and you gotta drill it, and then, it becomes sink or swim, trial by fire.
Absolutely.
And if you don't make it, so what? If you don't get that gig, so what? That's
Yeah.
not the end. Even the biggest gig that I've ever gotten, even though I would love any band that I'm a part of, I always think about doing it for the rest of my life. Like, if I'm playing with someone, even if I'm just a hired gun, if I'm playing with someone, it's because I want to too. It's not just for the paychecks, because I want to do it, right? And so any band that I've gotten hired from, I would love to be that band member for the rest of time.
Yeah.
But if not, eh, not the end of my path. Like, I'm just gonna keep playing
Just
and
keep trying.
keep doing. Luckily, we don't work bass. Luckily, we don't have to do anything other than play
Yeah.
exactly what we wanted to do.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so much of performing too is also moving around. Like, there's tons of, with that upright behind you, right? There's tons of people who just stand there and they're like, do 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 do.
Mhm.
But you ever see a rockabilly bass player?
Yeah.
They're doing, like, jump jiving and wailing. Speaking of Brian Setzer, right?
Yeah. Oh, so that's a part of that interview. He's talking about touring with Brian, and he said the guy that's played stand-up bass for Brian got the job. He didn't even know how to play stand-up bass. He played it for that. He learned how to play it for that gig. And he said it would blow your mind how badass that guy was.
So I just heard this story about the Brian Setzer band from my boss over at School of Rock, Tevis. She was friends with the bass player from Brian Setzer, and they used to go to the shows. And there was one time where she's a bass player, but she had never played an upright bass before. So I want to talk about difference in techniques, right?
Yeah.
She would get pulled up on the stage all the time to do backup vocals, right?
Mhm.
And one day the bass player just walked up to her, grabbed her,
Yeah.
threw her on the bass and said, "It's in B flat," and walked away. Right?
Great.
Talk about no time to prepare.
Huh?
Never played a stand-up bass before, like the fingering technique, the no frets, like all that.
Yeah.
And she got through it, man. She got through it. She played along to it. But there's also, you can fake it until you know what you're doing too. There's that.
Well, that's what we
If
talked
if
about.
someone did that to me, I could probably, if I got pulled up on stage in that case, I'm willing to bet that I could at least 65% probability that I could smash it out of the park. At least
Yeah.
65%,
Yeah.
even not having a single idea what string is in what tuning or whatever, just by having that familiarity of
Yeah.
knowing how things resonate off of one another.
Yeah, I can't wait till we get into like ear training and stuff like that in later episodes. We're gonna get into so much really cool stuff like
I
that.
know, because as a bass player, our number one thing that we can do
Uh-huh.
is a well-timed slide. Like, a well-timed slide not only makes the song so much better, but if it's a well-timed slide because you messed up and it makes the song better, we're talking couple birds, one stone here.
Well-timed slides make the world go round.
Right. Make the hips go round.
Woo-hoo.
Like a
Awesome.
single lady.
We got into some really awesome stuff today. And we're so happy that we could bring such awesome information to everybody, especially about the primary role of a bassist. Because I think a lot of people just, some people think, oh, they're just up there playing, whatever. But there's so much to the bass. And if you
And
don't
to
know
be fair,
that,
though,
now
they
you know.
can be.
Oh, they can be. They can be.
They
Yeah,
can
I
be.
think so.
You can go up and you could play bass and you can mail it in. You could
Mhm.
do it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
But
true. You can mail anything in, I guess.
but yeah, exactly. But not if you're doing it the way, hopefully, like any of you who are watching this right now, you're probably lovers of music, and odds are you're not looking to mail it in, and that's why you're here. And because of that, we thank you so very much for joining us on our third episode of Bass Cafe with Holly and Dean. This is so cool. This
Yeah.
is so cool. I was a little tired today, so this was good. It was good, but I'm so happy to be doing this. When you love what you do,
Hmm.
or sorry, when you do what you love, you just might find that you love what you do.
That's right. Yeah. And you've been teaching all day, huh? On your
I
Patreon.
have been, yeah, and my son also does virtual school here during the day too. So it's like I'm not only just teaching the music lessons, but I'm also,
Open him.
also in eighth grade at the same time. I'm,
You're
I'm
like
not.
Madison.
Yeah, I'm in eighth grade and I teach Rock 101 and Little Wing and private lessons. I'm also a part-time mechanic whenever my car breaks down. All those things.
Perfect.
We're master of a couple trades.
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in today. And thanks, Pete Merluzzi, for being our guest.
Yeah, thank you
Awesome
so much.
stuff.
He's so cool. I can't wait to see what people say about his responses about who is the best bass player.
That's right. Who is it?
Who?
Okay, well, we'll see you guys next time. Thanks so much.
Bye, guys. Remember, like, share, subscribe, and spread the word about Bass Cafe with Holly and Dean. Please visit me on patreon.com/Dean Music Official and Holly at patreon.com/Holly West Music, right?
Yes, and my website, www.hollywestmusic.
And I'm DeanMusicOfficial.com. Thank you so very much. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye, guys.